really quickly. Oh, there we go. We're going to record this.
Congratulations. Sorry about that.
Thanks very much. Um, I just wanted to just acknowledge that and I am, at least not like Steve, on the unceded and ancestral homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And so, wherever you find yourself, please just take some time to recognize that you're also on Indigenous lands. And so I also like to just reflect on some of the words of the commissioners in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the What We Heard report that said all Canadians must now demonstrate the same level of courage and determination as we commit to an ongoing process of reconciliation by establishing a new and respectful relationship between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Canadians. We restore what must be restored, repair what must be repaired, and return what must be returned. And so I wanted just to recognize and acknowledge that and say a few of those words. And so just a couple of things that really quickly there, yeah, if you have questions as things go, please add it in the chat. Also, Iona had mentioned there's a Slido, so if you did want to just kind of use that mechanism to ask questions, please feel free to do that. And as I was, we're going to record the session, so hopefully that's okay. It'll give us an opportunity to have a little bit of a record of what happened. So thank you very much. And with that, Iona.
Thanks, Fabian. Yeah, so thank you for joining us, as already Fabian said. What we'll be doing over the next 50 minutes or so, we will talk a little bit about ourselves, give you a bit of an intro if you don't know us already. And then we have some discussion points that we have prepared beforehand to talk about our experience so far running as a candidate and kind of what has the topic that we're really interested in exploring today is about kind of representation in politics and also how to engage people who have cultural or language barriers. So talk a bit about that. And then we will open it up to questions. So questions you can pose in the chat function or in the Slido. So that's really it. And I think I'm next again. So yeah, we want to open it up first with a little bit of background on who we are. So I'll start and then I'll pass it over to Fabian. So my name is Iona Bonamis. My Chinese name is Tosi Wing. I'm a second generation Chinese Canadian, born and raised in Vancouver, in East Vancouver, more specifically. And I'm a mom of two kids, an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old. So they keep me really busy during most days. And the reason I ran for or sought the OneCity nomination in 2022 and this year is because of my kids, really thinking about their future and the other future generations. I am concerned about what it would look like. For me, the impacts of climate change is always top of mind. That's a big issue, but also there are other issues and many of them are related to climate and in terms of housing. I don't know if they will have a safe home, be able to afford live in Vancouver. Will they have the natural environment that we have are able to enjoy right now? Parks and green spaces are so important for our physical and mental well-being. And also even like community centers, which are also really important for our health. All of those things. As well, my experience in working at the city as an urban planner really gave me a lot of insights on a lot of things that we could be doing at the city, but aren't, that could have a real impact on how people live. And yeah, there are a lot of things that city staff have, the great ideas, great initiatives, but they often get blocked by council or by leadership because council doesn't feel like they don't feel like they'll have the support from council. So it doesn't even make it to a council meeting. And as a city staff, I was very frustrated by that. And so I felt like, yes, I have some influence in my role as an urban planner, but I felt like there was just this ceiling. I didn't see the leadership that I've been wanting for a long time. So I was tired of waiting. I decided to run for council. I'm going to turn over to Fabian.
Yeah, I'll keep it really brief. For those of you that don't know me, I come from an immigrant family, so I'm a first generation Canadian. That my parents were born in and came from Chile and Argentina, so a tough combo in the household when World Cup was on and those matches came into play. But some of you may have heard this, but I always tell people that I kind of consider myself contraband. So, what does that mean? Well, when my family moved to Canada, they already had two kids, my mom and dad. And then when they moved to Canada, they didn't want to sort of update all the paperwork. And having a third kid kind of come when they didn't have that on the list of people coming didn't sort of seem like a good idea. So they kind of just kept it quiet. And my mom didn't show when she was pregnant. So lo and behold, about 4 months later, I was born, and the first of my family that was born in Canada. So, um, and so for me, yeah, I come from a public service background. I've worked in the public service all my career and in cities and the city of Vancouver and Edmonton, Regina, where I'm from, Saskatchewan. So I've done a lot of work focusing on housing and infrastructure. And for me, public service has always been pretty personal because I've, you know, worked on policy and I've needed systems. I've needed government systems and assistance as an immigrant family. So for me, you know, public service and policy was always a personal thing, not just a sort of a vocation of mine. So yeah, so for me, a lot of the frustration that I had, kind of about what was going on kind of really got me in the place where I felt like I needed to run. So I didn't feel like decisions were being made that reflected the interests of most people that live in the city. And so I thought, well, I'll take some of that experience that I have in understanding how those systems work and my real experiences sort of being connected to public services myself and make a go of it and see if I can affect some change in a positive way, which is why I'm here. And so yeah, that's just a little bit about me and why I'm kind of doing this crazy thing. Running in politics is new to me. So yeah, appreciate that. So what we wanted to do is really just have this really interesting conversation. I think at this time around sort of politics today, and so I think the way I wanted to sort of lead off the conversation, and please feel free to ask questions and stuff, and we'd be more than happy to get into the discussion. But really about when I came into politics, what was sort of my first sort of impressions of politics and where politics is today. And for me, the first real glimpse of that was really about how much politics is about relationships and perception and not just ideas. So before running, I thought I had a pretty strong policy and then I could explain it clearly and that would sort of carry the day. But once you're a candidate, you realize how pretty quickly that you need to, that it's more about trust and people and whether people see themselves in you and the values and ideas that you have. And so it's less about those policy solutions, which is tough for a policy guy like me. And I also saw how much happens outside of the formal process. So the decisions aren't always made in the rooms that you're in. They're shaped in conversations and the networks and who knows who. And so for me, I started to really reflect on my experiences as someone that is new to the party, new to the process, and how that parallels perhaps to how residents and voters feel. Someone pretty new to the system, that kind of stood out to me. There are these spaces that you're not automatically involved in, and there are relationships you haven't built yet, and you kind of feel that gap. So that gave me like a really different perspective because that feeling of being outside looking in, of trying to understand how decisions get made, that's not unique to certainly candidates, although it does in the circumstance, but it's how a lot of people feel in the city. So if you're new to Vancouver, a recent immigrant, for example, you're renting, maybe you work multiple jobs. If you didn't grow up around politics, you don't always feel like the systems were built for you and you don't really know how to access them. So this sort of really interesting dynamic happened in terms of I'm entering into this new system that I don't really know how it works. And then I'm like, wow, that's also very similar to how people who are in politics sometimes don't feel how they can be engaged in the system. They seem excluded or feel excluded from it. So it really is reinforcing to me that we need to have people in these kinds of roles who understand how systems work, but also remember what it feels like to be outside of them, trying to get in. And I think that's a significant sort of thing that I've started to notice and think about as I sort of embarked on this process of running in a nomination.
All right, couldn't find my mute button. Um, yeah, thanks for sharing that, Fabian. I think, yeah, for me, the experience, both times that I've run so far, have been overall quite positive, and there have been things that have surprised me, I would say. Uh, one incident I remember back in 2022, I was going down to Chinatown and to speak with some businesses with another candidate, Matthew Norris at the time. And we were wanting to just chat with business owners to see what their experience was like, if they had any specific concerns and issues that they wanted to flag for us. And we also talked about safety, of course. We wanted to get their perspective, what they thought the neighborhood was like as a business owner, and reported out kind of our findings over social media. And in summary, we found that people said, they had some safety concerns, but it wasn't as severe as the media often made it out to be. And that's what we heard, so that's what we reported on, and we had a we just put that on social media, and then kind of immediately we got all of these social media trolls, like just hounding us and criticizing us and saying that we were performative, and we were yeah, there's not it was not what those people wanted to hear, those trolls. And it was very interesting because I would say the majority of them were people who were white. And as far as I could tell from their comments, they didn't have a lot of actually connections. They didn't like necessarily live or work in Chinatown. And so that experience kind of just really made me aware of like how social media is not a great way to engage people in real dialogue. It's like conversations like these, face to face, that are so important, especially when it comes to complex issues and coming talking about politics. Um, and yeah, I think also it speaks to just the importance of going to people where they are, and listening to people instead of talking at people. So going to people, yeah. I think that is also just one of the key things to engage people who with cultural barriers or economic barriers or physical barriers. So many things that can prevent people from being engaged.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that's a really interesting point, Iona, that it's also like it's you know who you are often, how you like what you carry in terms of the color of your skin, but it also is there's all these other sort of dimensional factors that influence, whether someone's poor or has resources or is disabled. There's a bunch of different sort of things that sort of interact in these places and spaces that we often, you know, we're not really responding to and people aren't sort of seeing um, in a real sort of way. And I
yeah,
certainly have sort of honestly felt that a little bit myself in this process.
yeah, right. And I'd say overall, like we have seen a bit more representation, at the political level. But on council right now, I'd say we only have two people who are from the Chinese community. We don't really have any other ethnic communities or racialized communities represented. We don't have any Indigenous, Black people, South Asian descent. Um, uh, you know, there's so many people. There that Vancouver is such a diverse community, and our representatives, our elected representatives, don't currently represent our community, I would say. Um,
Mhm.
but that's just one aspect, of course. Representation is only one aspect of having good leadership. I want to make sure that we have the right people who are values aligned as well. Maybe I'll also touch on, I think, like, why it could be challenging to be involved in politics. Um, why we aren't seeing necessarily a lot more people raising their hands. And one, is, of course, is time commitment. I feel like I'm living and breathing and dreaming about this all the time. Like last night, I was dreaming about this, and I've dropped, like, I was running late, and I like didn't, I didn't change, and my hair was like completely disheveled, and so it's like always on my mind. So it's really all consuming. Um, and so if you have a family, you have a job, you might have multiple jobs, it's hard to be able to carve out that time to run, and then actually to serve. Another hesitation that I have thought about myself and others I've heard from is about the loss of anonymity and privacy. Um, it- you definitely, um, you'll be more recognized, and what you say will be, more heavily criticized. Um, and yeah, it can be a bit of a thankless job. You can never please everyone. There will always be people who aren't happy with you. Um, and I remember canvassing in 2022. I was just talking to someone, I was approaching someone and telling them I was running, and they're like, "Oh, you're just in it for the money, and for the power." And I'm like, "Well, I'd be taking actually a pay cut if I get elected." And she's like, "Oh, well, you're just gonna get a really great pension afterwards." I'm like, "Nope, that's untrue." Nope, neither are true. So yeah, it's really interesting to see people's impressions of who a politician is and who will serve as a politician.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's definitely real. I like for me, one of the things, one the interesting things, so like I'm Latin American, I'm Latino, and I as a share of the population in this city, it's I think around 2 to 3%. So we're not a lot of the population, but when you look at who's in politics within that group, it's even smaller, right? And so it's the kind of so that even in a diverse city, that not every community sometimes feels reflected in the decisions that are coming and that are happening. And what's often missing, I think, aren't just specific demographics, though that matters. It's really lived experience as well. So people who are renting, people who are navigating childcare, to your point, Iona, people working multiple jobs, newcomers are all starting to sort of figure out how this sort of system works and where they can be engaged. And those perspectives don't always show up in decision making in a meaningful way. One of the things I was really interested about was so I guess, and I saw this from the Canadian Institute of Planners, and so I think this was from 2021, which is the only data I could really find from this was that about 18.8% of those of the more than 8,000 members of the Planning Institute are non-white, compared to about 22% of the population. So, so you're seeing even within sort of the types of spaces that we're engaged in with municipal politics, you don't have a lot of diversity within those sort of staff spaces, and so one of the things that I've certainly noticed is a lot of, and that kind of manifests itself in a lot of the politics that we see, the people who come out to public hearings, or the people who are sort of more engaged, are the people who have more time, who have more money, and in many cases, a lot of those people are white, and a lot of times they're men. And so I think there's this sort of need within this space of politics and in municipal politics to sort of say, look past and beyond simply who kind of shows up. And I mean we see it in the institutions themselves. And so So if we're seeing it within the institutions themselves, we also need to sort of say, okay, well, how can we broaden this within the scope of those who are representing us? And I think one of the things that's important to me, and one of the reasons why I wanted to run as well, was I wanted to show a different face. And to me, that's an important part of this process, and I think it's an important part for municipal politics, and certainly for OneCity, and what we're trying to achieve here as a sort of movement to get people engaged in municipal politics in a meaningful way. So it's a really kind of space that historically I think has been reserved in many ways, in many respects, for people who have time, people who have money, people who have property. And a lot of times those are the people that are the ones who typically are sort of white male, well off kind of folks. And so it's time that we, I think, address that problem and that issue. Um, so I I hope that isn't too controversial. And if it is, then good, because I think it's something that we need to do. And so, part of the sort of next phase of that then is sort of, okay, these institutions, this whole thing is sort of established for hasn't been sort of fit for other people. So how do we sort of engage communities that we traditionally aren't involved or maybe face language and cultural barriers? And I think that is a really important conversation to have, and for us to sort of move forward. And I think the starting point is recognizing that engagement isn't just about access. It's really about trust. And so I think too often we treat language and cultural barriers as a communication problem, when really there's a relationship problem. So perhaps, and I think maybe Iona, you could probably speak to this in some of your comments, especially what we've seen with Ken Sim, and sort of the issues with what he said around with the Chinese and to the Chinese community. But I'll let you jump into that one. But translation matters, but it's sort of not enough. You can translate a flyer, but if people don't trust the process or don't feel like their input actually shapes decisions, then they're not going to engage. And so often, how the city engages communities, for example, is public hearings or getting other pieces of input from those kinds of ways, and it's not building trust, and it's not getting people involved. It's very intimidating for people to engage in those ways. I don't know how many of you presented before a council, but a lot of people find that whole venue intimidating. Like, it's really hard to stand up to a bunch of folks and start talking to them, and it's like, ooh, God, that's hard. So for me, the approach is to meet where people are. And so working with trusted community leaders and showing up in spaces people already feel comfortable in, and having conversations in ways that feel sort of natural and not transactional. So just as an example, just this week I attended a movie night event that is put on by some Colombianos here in East Vancouver. It's a chance for them to get together, speak their language, hear their language. They watch movies in Spanish and really build community. And it's one of those places that's important kind of for us to access. Often these spaces are only sort of, but only available to people who have the same language or cultural values. Like, it's easier for me to come into these spaces than it is for some others, right? And so I think it's important for us to have that diversity so we can enter these rooms where traditionally these rooms, uh, others aren't really, they don't feel welcome or don't feel prepared for. And so I think that's another reason why I think we want to make sure that when we consider uh, how and who represents us, we want to be able to have those voices because they allow us to engage different types of communities in different types of ways. Iona?
Yeah, I could completely agree with you with everything you've said. Um, you said exactly what I was going to say. Like, we need to go to the people. We can't expect people to come to City Hall. It is such a big barrier for people to, wait, um, you know, throughout the day and maybe evening to speak. If you have family, if you have a job, or multiple jobs, how are you going to have that time to set aside?
For
And the like now we have a bit more time. If you speak another language, you have a bit more time to speak at council, but that is still a barrier. We're still not seeing a huge uptake of people speaking different languages and actually being able to bring an interpreter with them to come and speak. And so I agree, we need to go to the communities. Um, and it's not just about speaking like the language, uh, we think about traditional language, but in speaking in a way that resonates with the community, understanding what the values are of each community. That is also, that takes a lot of nuance and understanding of what matters, what are the issues that matter to people, and how to speak it in a way that people feel like you're hearing them. Um, and yeah, I say, when we're going to the people, it doesn't mean going on WeChat and making false accusations, wild accusations. Um, that is inappropriate, especially for elected officials to do. And so that is not something that I would be, supporting. And it's also just talking at people. You're not actually listening to people, what people have to say. So that listening piece, again, is so important. And then after we've listened to people's issues and concerns, we need to come back and report out on how we've actioned their issues or not. We need to explain. So we need to be accountable as well. As you said, we can't be transactional. We need to be able to show that we've heard people are saying and then that we're acting on it.
Yeah, and I think is there like the all the issue that came forward around Ken Sim and his approach to, I mean, what's really interesting to me, and I would value your thoughts on this. And one of the interesting things is, and I reflect on this a lot, is there's just sometimes this sense that people of a certain color or certain culture, they're all the same, or like that you have all the same kind of perspective. It's sort of monolithic, right? And often even the challenge is that these communities are just as diverse in terms of their, in many cases, in terms of their thoughts and perspectives. They carry um, sort of their experience is different, their approach might be different, but even within those communities, you have different sets of values, perspectives, and opinions. And so people might sort of think, well, is that, what I found really interesting, and maybe I'm going to hit fire here, but um, Ken Sim's response to the Chinese community by saying, if he was purposely attaching that idea of not being comfortable with social housing or drugs, and sort of painting this broad brush that the Chinese speaking community by and large agrees with that particular sentiment. And there certainly might be, but like what's your thoughts about that sort of whole sort of painting everybody with that same sort of brush as well?
Yeah, well, definitely. There is that tendency to try to say think that one community will have all the same thoughts, but I completely agree that it's definitely not true. There are so many differences within the Chinese community. There are, I would say, uh, yeah, like between generations, there's also differences, right? And even within the same generation, people can have a spectrum of perspectives and thoughts. People in my generation, I know people who are more supportive, people who are less supportive of social housing and supportive housing. So it's really unfair for yeah, ABC to try to, I think that the community, the Chinese community, would all think the same way.
Yeah, and it's certainly yeah, you sometimes get, and that I think, and I one of the interesting things to me is you sort of, maybe you feel this too, but sometimes when you're, you sort of feel like you have to represent an entire community sometimes, or like people think somehow it's like, oh, you're a Latin guy, you must have all the ins and know exactly where everything is and what people are thinking and all this kind of stuff. And the answer usually is, no, right? So it's also this kind of thing happens where there's sort of this expectation then that somehow you should sort of represent everybody and everything about that community, but that's just it's not really realistic because that community itself can be pretty diverse in terms of what it thinks and feels and acts.
Yeah, and that's why you need to have more people, right, from those communities in those rooms and having those discussions. So not one person is tokenized, and they are supposed to represent their entire cultural community.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
an important point. It's beyond, it's not just taking and looking at people from like it's acknowledging them and their differences and what they bring from those different cultural perspectives, but not necessarily to your words like not just tokenizing them as though that's the entire sort of that's all they have to bring as well, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Which can be problematic in many respects.
Yeah. Should we open up to people's questions if others have
Yeah, like
questions for us?
I think so. Yeah, like if there's let's this is a really an interesting time to have dialogue, I think, which is what we were sort of really wanting to do is hear from folks and say like what are your thoughts about this whole area of representation and politics today and if there's anything that has sort of caught you and caught your attention from this conversation that we're having.
Yeah, sorry if I could interject. Everyone could go to Slido. There should be a note on the meeting info. If you go to slido.com and enter the code 1112785, and you'll be able to join the Slido and ask your questions. And please upvote the questions as well. We already have 4 questions, and the and we will answer the questions based on the number of upvotes. I will start with the highest upvoted one right now. And this is to both candidates. Have you had any surprises campaigning? What have caught you off guard?
Um, I can start first. Like to
Sure.
again? Yeah. Um, I would say, going back to the communication piece, for me, what I have kind of surprised myself is how much I actually enjoyed door knocking. I know a lot of people don't like doing that. It's tiring. You're spending a lot of hours on your feet, but I really enjoyed it. It's because it allows me to speak with people one on one. I can it's time for me to listen to people about what's on their mind, uh, what's keeping them up at night. And then I have an opportunity to, try to express empathy first. That's really important. And also try to make that connection of, their issue and what OneCity, as part of our platform, what we could do to help address that issue. And I found just that those interactions incredibly rewarding. And people are generally very reasonable when they're like just by themselves talking to you. There's no mob mentality. Um, and I only got maybe like chased off a property one time. So overall, really good.
That's always good when you don't get chased out. I actually think for me, one of the big things is I actually thought going into this that most people were gonna sounds weird maybe like that they just want to hear what you have to say about something. And I think a lot of people do, but I was kind of surprised how much people just want to be heard. Like it's really interesting how like you go in thinking that you need to have all sort of the answers and a lot of time people are just sort of wanting to actually have you listen to them and sort of take them seriously and that's particularly true for folks that typically aren't engaged in politics, right? Like they kind of welcome that opportunity and so when you do that the conversation I think kind of changes and it's less it becomes just more sort of fluid and interesting. And so that kind of surprised me just how many people kind of just pay attention to or want to be paid attention to in that way and don't necessarily expect you to kind of have all the answers. There's a quiet audience out there. And I think that if you're sort of thoughtful and listening and using the right approach, then it's a lot easier to sort of engage them in conversation. So I was actually kind of a little bit surprised that you start, I don't know, you guys, you start thinking, oh my God, I gotta prep. I need to know all the answers. And like, no, not really. Most people just want to be heard. And that kind of surprised me. And it makes it a little easier.
Great answers. Moving on to the next question. This one is from Tyler. How do you take care of yourself in an increasingly hostile and contentious political climate? We've got right into the tough ones.
I guess I can start now this one, Iona, and then you can kind of bump up second there. Um so here's the thing. I think it's weird. I didn't expect that in this, even in sort of a nomination process, that I would hear from people being really nasty. And I actually got a comment on something the other day asking me what's the definition of a man or what's the definition of a woman. And it was this just sort of passive aggressive sort of kind of attack at wanting to sort of get and feel me out in terms of how and what I think of that. And I it kind of took me back. It was my first sort of real kind of nasty, like, what? Like, why are you asking me this? And so, I kind of it's kind of trippy, right? You have these moments where you feel really positive and really good because you have these really meaningful kind of interactions with folks. And then it's like this schizophrenic thing happens and everything falls apart and you hear something ugly or you hear a rumor or something happens and you're kind of bouncing from these sort of extremes. And I think a lot of that is indicative of sort of where our politics has gone, right? It's like all of these sort of extremes in terms of the kinds of people that engage in politics and sort of you're bouncing among those extremes all the time and everything that you feel and think is kind of formulated by where those extremes kind of land. And so I started trying to reflect on that a little bit more and say like, okay, just eliminate the ups and the downs and the one side and the other side, and then you've got this nice little sweet spot. And trying to sort of at least just stay in that sort of realm and kind of push that other noise where I don't think people are really that interested and the returns are super minimal if you ever do engage with people in those kind of places. So
Yeah, that's a great answer, Fabian. Um, I will say that for me, I tend to go, 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 and then forget to take care of myself. Like I will like realize, oh, I have been going to events like 9 days straight. And I feel so exhausted. So I now try to look ahead in my calendar and make sure I schedule those times when I don't have anything. Even if it's just, yeah, one evening. I'm still working during the day, but in the evening, I'm not like there's one evening I'm not going to an event, so I can have dinner with my family and restore, find that energy again. So I find that to be something that is helpful for me to just take care of myself, scheduling in those pauses. Yeah.
Thank you for answering that. Moving on to the next question. What do you think Lenny and Ken should have done differently in the aftermath of their misinformation being exposed?
Yes, I know. Um, well, they shouldn't have waited, first of all, to apologize, and Ken Sim should have, you know, passed it up and admitted that he was the source of the misinformation right away, instead of letting Lenny take, take the fault, and then having the press expose him. It just, I don't know, that just makes common sense to me, if you've done something wrong. And, it's like he spoke to a bunch of media people. Like, how do you expect to keep that under wraps? Why wouldn't you think to come out ahead of it and try to address that first? Um, so yeah, there's that. And then they should also be making the official apology in Mandarin in the WeChat, in the WeChat community. That, as far as I know, still hasn't happened. That's where the misinformation first started. Um, I guess at least in the more public sphere. And so they should be going to that community and making that official apology. I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of lean to Iona a little more connected on that. Like, I think that's true. I mean, like they need to sort of go back to the source of where this is. Like, it was a specific communication that was targeted to a certain type of person, a certain group of people, and it sort of incumbent on them to sort of do an apology to using that sort of same venue, right? So that just only makes sense. I think, in politics, people, it's kind of interesting. Like, you always wonder, if you screw up, and I think we all have this hesitation. Anybody that's sort of run in politics or that's thinking about it, and you're like, well, what the hell happens if I mess up? Like, what am I going to do if I screw up? And I think in large part, most people just want you to sort of be real about it. So if you did make a mistake, so it's like, you know what? Someone flashed me this photo of AI slop, and I shouldn't have done what I did, and it was a mistake. It was a boneheaded issue. I shouldn't have done it, but I'm gonna apologize, and I'm gonna apologize to the community and kind of own up to it. I think people would kind of just move on. But when you don't do that, and you don't sort of close that book and that chapter of the whole issue, then it just keeps going. And the way that I thought the mayor and I mean, less so Lenny Zhou, because he sort of did apologize for what he did, although he didn't do it on WeChat, which I think is not right. But the mayor just kind of dragged it out, and he didn't sort of take the kind of accountability that I think most people sort of just expect when you make a mistake. And and I think we're kind of entering this sort of political realm now where there's, the sort of old rules of sort of deflect, 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 um, are not working, and they don't work. And I think people kind of just see through that. There's way too much information and conversation and discussion, and you're not just going in front of one, evening newscast and things get shut down. Like, it's all over the place all the time, and people just, you can't do that anymore. You need to just take accountability and move on. And I think it's a lesson for all of us that you can make a mistake and you can fix it if you just fess up.
Great answers. Moving on to the next question. Municipal politics is often neglected, and municipal elections often have very low turnout. How do we convince people that municipal politics and government matters?
I guess I could start this one. That's the $1 million question that we all ask ourselves, right? And I kind of spoke a little bit about how some of the sort of, I think, institutions and structures are sort of built to kind of have just naturally kind of excluded certain types of people, particularly around the sort of the formal processes of sort of council. Like, it happens during the day when people are working, or people aren't able to sort of participate in the kinds of ways that the system kind of allows you to participate in. But I think part of that too is also being able to sort of have communication with people in a real sort of serious and real way about how these issues impact your life in everyday kind of ways. And so making it real. I remember I used to work for I did some work in city politics, and I did some work around the Federation of Canadian Municipalities years ago, and they were doing some work to try to say, well, the conversation was like infrastructure. We say the word infrastructure. What does infrastructure mean? And sort of finding ways to communicate these ideas, and sort of, well, that sidewalk that you walk on, it's, the cracks are really big and bad, and we want to fix that. Or, those street lights, that's infrastructure. It's all these kinds of things that we sometimes talk over people about. And I think if we talk to them sort of pretty plainly about what this stuff is and what it means to them, then maybe they'll be a little bit more engaged. But right now, I think, you know, if things are working generally okay, people kind of just like, I'm just going to leave it be. But we need to sort of make these things a little bit more real and how they affect people's lives on a day-to-day basis. I think easier said than done, but
Yeah, I'll add to that. I would say that, yeah, a lot of people, the average person, they don't really have a full understanding of how municipal politics and what municipal governments do that impact people's lives, that touch on their lives. So there is a lot of, I think, a lot of awareness that we need to do more of, and help people understand what infrastructure means, and that the city is responsible for, the building of, new sidewalks. And that means you have a place to walk on if you're walking to school with your kid or walking the dog. Um, and we're also responsible for some childcare, looking for childcare spaces. Um, People don't understand that necessarily. And so I think, yeah, a lot more about civic education, I think, is required. And I'll just put in a plug, Women Transforming Cities has been doing a lot more of that, because that is a gap. That's something that the city has not been doing well. I know, like, the city of Edmonton has been really good about it. I've seen some great training that they provide, but City of Vancouver, we don't offer that. And so, Women Transforming Cities has been trying to fill that gap, and doing it on, the very few dollars. We could definitely support more of that work. And I was gonna say also, yeah, just doing the door knocking also is really helpful. To have those one-on-one conversations again to help people help explain, how their concerns are related to municipal government decisions.
yeah, you have to in anything that you do, you have to make it real for people, right? Like it's the sort of true tide tested, like what's in it for me, and if people don't sort of see themselves in that question of what's in it for me, then they'll disengage, and so you try to do that, and part of what I think, and I know Iona does in a very thoughtful way, and what I'm hoping to try to do, I think, is engage people in those kinds of conversations in a way that's accessible, uh, and addresses and goes to different people from different places. And so that's the challenge and that's the project, right?
A little change of the topic, and I think this will be our last question of the night. This is from Steve. Love the comments early on about relationships. Building relationships is very important. How do you see building a strong alliance between the mayor, the council, school board, and park board? How do all of these entities work together?
Yeah, great question. Yes, of course, relationships matter, and um, all of these different boards and councils, there are a lot of overlapping responsibilities, you know. So absolutely, we should be regularly communicating and working alongside. I'm seeking a nomination for council, so, park board and school board people who are running and will be serving on those boards, we need to be in constant communication. Um, Too often times, I've seen, like, council make a decision and then the park board makes a completely different decision. Um, and if there was better communication between those two bodies, I think we could help avoid all of that angst and frustration. Because as the public, you see these very different decisions that are made. And it's frustrating because you think, oh, something's going to get passed. But it's Park Board says yes. I'm thinking the Weston Waterfront Plan. Park Board supported that, and then went to council. No, they didn't support it. So it was very disappointing to see that. Um, yeah, and of course, between mayor and council, that's really important. Mayor just gets one vote, I have to say. Like, a lot of people don't understand that. Just like a councillor, mayor gets one vote. they have or obviously more responsibilities, but we have to be working alongside all together and um, yeah, making sure that um, there's just really good communication between everyone.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll make this one quick, but I think it's like Iona's right? Like you need to be able to have sort of good conversations, and part of that is sort of maybe sometimes when there's disagreements, kind of even sort of different parties representing different groups, kind of putting that aside a little bit to kind of make decisions that work. But I think there are probably some mechanisms that can be put in place to actually do some of this too. So you know, there is I think there's an opportunity to have sort of regular sort of touch points within each of the elected. So like every 6 months or maybe every quarter, you meet and you talk about some of the issues. You have an agenda of things that you're working on collectively. I think that's something that with some leadership we can do. I think the other one is, and this is a little bit more geeky, but we've got an ODP now, and part of the process in the next phase of that an official development plan is to sort of kind of update and move that official development plan into other places. And I think like actually creating tables to sort of integrate park board and school board information and ideas and work within the development of the next sort of official development plan, which is still sort of years out, but getting those mechanisms in place where we actually can maybe do some joint planning, right? Because the school board has plans and the city has plans and the parks board has plans, and let's try to see if we can find a way to sort of bring these plans together in a way that respects the jurisdictions of each accountable, and but also kind of brings it into one place where people are transparently understand and know what's going on. So I think there's a few things we can kind of look at more sort of procedurally that might also help.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just say one more thing. I think also the relationship with our provincial and federal um, governments are also really important. A lot of the things that we want to see happen, we don't necessarily have full jurisdiction, so we need to have those good relationships with those higher levels of government as well. And I think now with Christine being our housing minister and Greg at the provincial level, and then Gregor Robertson at the federal level, I think we have definitely that opportunity to build stronger relationships with higher levels of government.
That's all the questions for both of you. Now, please take some time and just have a closing statement.
Yeah, so real quick, I'll just close up real quick and just number one, just say thanks for coming. There was a few folks had to drop off, but really appreciate those of you who stuck around. It's really great to start having a bit of this conversation with everybody, and I think we want to kind of continue this. I think it's important that we kind of don't shy away from conversations around identity and politics and what it means and how it influences how decisions are made and who gets to influence decisions. I think it's important. We need to lean into that kind of conversation, and we need to be ready as a city and as a party to sort of welcome those kinds of different voices. And so I really just thank you for listening.
I think we forgot to give a shout out to our other folks who are seeking nomination earlier on. So just do that quickly. We have Erin Chapman, who is also seeking nomination for council, Tyler Peterson seeking nomination for park board, and then Stephen Cardwell seeking nomination for school board trustee. Yeah, so thank you, as Fabian said, thank you for joining us. And I'll make a plug in case anybody is not yet a OneCity member. Make sure you join before April 10th to be able to vote in the nomination race, which will happen March 3rd to March 10th. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Have a good evening.
Hey, bye.